Good morning, Europe, and dobre ranko. I'm Roger Hilton, and welcome to this morning edition of Global Tremors. We are approaching a week of Russia's invasion with Ukraine, with civilian deaths rising. The increased Russian assault, notably against the eastern city of Kharkiv, described as undisguised terror by President Zelensky, comes against the backdrop of President Joe Biden's first State of the Union and Moscow's declaration to start striking communication establishments and government infrastructure within Kiev. The world remains horrified. Joining us from Ukraine is Dr. Yevgeniya Gaber, Foreign Policy Analyst and Former Diplomat. Dr. Gaber, welcome to Global Tremors.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Dr. Gaber, before we get started, for all of our viewers out there on Global Tremors, I just want to give you the big hits from yesterday's State of the Union address with President Biden. So when it came to Ukraine, a couple of points to mention, and I quote, President Joe Biden promised to inflict pain on Russian President Vladimir Putin in response to Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, similar talking points. And then finally, we are choking off Russia's access to technology that will sap its economic strength and weaken its military for years to come. Dr. Gaber, you're a foreign policy expert. Before we get to the thematic questions, do you have any immediate reactions to these small points from the State of the Union?
Well, obviously, the level of support which we are now getting from our international partners, including the United States, is an unprecedented one, because the situation which we have in Ukraine is also unprecedented one. As you mentioned, that was a completely unprovoked aggression from the Russian Federation, and the scope of especially the civilian tolls, especially the methods which are being used by the Russian Federation currently, which can be categorized as war crimes, basically, and crimes against humanity, they demand very asymmetric and very strong response. So the support which we're getting from the United States, I believe it's been rising within the last months, but especially during the last week after the start of the blunt invasion into Ukraine. And this is another step which yesterday was declared by President Biden. Such things as access to new technologies, advanced technologies, such things as sectoral sanctions, not only personal, but sectoral sanctions, which target specific areas and specific strategic industries like defense industry, like energy sector, like banking sector. They're extremely important, of course. What we expect from international community, apart from this, of course, everyone is talking now about a no-fly zone over Ukraine, because most of the shells, including the use of the weapons which are banned by all international agreements and treaties, this is what is one of the most dangerous things in this invasion. So there are some steps which we would expect from our partners to do, but still, again, want to underline it, the level of financial support, level of support in weapons, including the lateral defensive weapons, the cut of many of Russian bans from the SWIFT system and so on, this is incredible. So yesterday's remarks from President Biden, I believe, were not the last ones, and hopefully we'll see the new, even more strong response.
Dr. Gaber, thank you for providing your sort of immediate reaction to the State of the Union. It goes without saying that from 2014 to where we are now, it's not just American support in the Biden administration, but it's really international and global support and the outpouring of it, material and financial, coming in. A couple of points just to pick up on. When it comes to Russia being withheld on technology, they're already starting to feel the pinch with embargoes from the European Union on raw materials coming in. And for anybody yesterday who saw this very emotional press conference yesterday with Boris Johnson and a Ukrainian journalist, it was hard not to keep it together, sort of asking for the no-fly zone, which seems to really be a red line that NATO members and other European Union members don't want to enforce, for the risk of it coming right into conflict with Russian soldiers. So again, despite President Zelensky repeatedly demanding for the no-fly zone, which was also one of his big talking points on his CNN interview, it remains a work in progress, and Ukraine will still have to fight it on the ground. Dr. Gaber, let's switch to the battleground right now. Russia's invasion of Ukraine seems like ages ago with how much has changed, not just with European policy, but on the ground. What is your reaction to the ongoing resistance as the battle changes? And how much longer do you think Ukraine can continue to fight back at this pace, assuming military and financial aid continues to flow in?
Well, a short comment regarding the no-fly zone, just as a follow-up to what you mentioned, here in Ukraine, we're absolutely aware of all the risks which might be connected to that, especially given that President Putin has been completely irrational in his decision-making for the recent days. But some experts are talking now about at least introducing a no-fly zone over the strategic facilities such as nuclear power plants in Ukraine, because those have been the objects of Russian aggression as well. And even if we are all afraid of a nuclear war might happen in a way that we never expected. Because if this is the case, and if the bombings and shellings happen in Energodar, for example, in Zaporizhia region, where we have the biggest NPP in Ukraine, and we have 4 of them in different regions, that would be a disaster. So I believe that there might be some ways to introduce it, at least partial, and that is, of course, something to be to think over and to consider for decision makers, both in the United States and in European capitals. Regarding the situation on the ground and the resilience of Ukrainian people, I believe that throughout these 8 years, which we have been in the state of the hybrid warfare as a Ukrainian society, we learned how to be resilient. And this word resilience, it is the best characteristics of what is happening now on the ground, with high morale of Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian army, with the unity of Ukrainian nation, disregarding political views, disregarding stances on different issues, even those political parties which were like most in opposition to each other, with different groups, we're all now working together. This resilience is also very important in terms of informational warfare and in terms of psychological warfare, which is also waged by Russian Federation. If you compare us in 2022 to what we had in 2014, for example, this is a completely different picture. How we organize ourselves, how our people get mobilized, volunteers, territorial defense units, soldiers, officers, police forces, National Guard, children, women, men, since we're defending our own land, and since we believe that we are waging a fair war to defend ourselves and our free choice in domestic and in foreign policy, this is what makes us strong. And this is why actually the so-called blitzkrieg in Ukraine, which was expected by many Russian strategists, did not happen. And that is why we have this complete disarray among Russian soldiers as well, because many of them, according to intelligence, which we get from different sources and according to their own witnesses, even did not know that they are brought to Ukraine to actually be involved in a hot conflict and in war, and that they get instructions to bomb civilian and residential areas. They were told that they will take part in some exercises and drills. So of course, with this psychological state of mind, with this disarray and this complete demoralization among Russian soldiers, I believe that Ukraine will resist anyhow, because we just don't have any other choice but to resist. We don't have any other country. Financial support is crucial here. Humanitarian support is crucial here, but also, of course, supplies in weapons, supplies in different kinds of equipment, the jets, for example, jet aircraft, which we had to get, and then there were some kind of problems with a couple of countries who changed their minds and so on. This is crucial for us. We don't expect any other country except for Ukraine to come and be present here with the boots on the ground. But what we need is, of course, support from international community, diplomatically, which we get. We are pleased to see that we could unite transatlantic partners to the level which we could not even expect a couple of months ago, including such projects as the Nord Stream 2 and so on. Of course, this is a military aid, technical aid, and sanctions, and one more time sanctions.
Dr. Gaber, thank you so much for sort of your sober reading of this situation, and for everybody joining us right now on Global Tremors. Dr. Gaber has provided some real insight, and a couple of the main points I want to stress for everybody is, as you said, Dr. Gaber, there is no other choice. So my original question about how long will the resistance last, given what you said, it will be infinite. And it was either yesterday or this morning, there was an op-ed in The Guardian by the very famous thinker Hawari, the Israeli, who talked about how Putin had planned on there being a hateless occupation, which is a great word to say. And, inadvertently, he has now turned a country of 40 million against, all of Russia. So I think that's a very interesting point when it comes to no other choice but to resist the occupiers. Dr. Gaber has outlined the total radical self-transformation of the Ukrainian people, their ability to mobilize, to self-organize, and resilience. And just as an example, Dr. Gaber, that really stood out for me, in the city of Lviv, there's a very famous brewery, Pravda Brewery, which has completely shifted its production from pivo and beer into Molotov cocktails with some very unique art with President Putin on it. So I think that sort of shows the gears about going 0 to 100 very quickly to resist. So thank you so much for your opening remarks on the resistance. Dr. Gaber, you yourself are a former diplomat. You've been in very high-level meetings, so you know a thing or two about messaging. A large part of Ukraine's immediate success right now has been keeping domestic morale high, sort of this will to fight, and also cajoling international support. Yesterday, again, President Zelensky from his bunker addressed the European Parliament and received a standing ovation, with no issue. President Zelensky and his entire staff, their messaging has resonated onwards with Ukrainian diaspora. And we've spoken to much younger, Ukrainians from Odessa, Kharkiv, and in the EU, and they themselves have turned into surrogates and, messengers for the Ukrainian messaging. So can you maybe elaborate on this, vital element that's, being deployed by Ukraine right now? And how do you think it might change as the battlefield changes?
Well, absolutely. The strategic communication has been crucial, and it remains to be. You mentioned that with this invasion of Ukraine, President Putin managed to turn 40 million of Ukrainians against himself. I would argue that he turned millions and millions of people all over the world against himself. And that is why Ukraine already won. Independently of what is happening in the battlefield, in terms of information war, in terms of public diplomacy, in terms of strategic communication, diplomatically, Ukraine has won the hearts and souls of people from Brazil, from the United States and Canada, up to Japan, China. Throughout Europe, we have these meetings and demonstrations all over, messages of solidarity from all European capitals, which we're very grateful for, and this also helps us to keep our morale high. But regarding the strategic communication, that was crucial, and that is also what the 7 years of the hybrid war have taught to us, that you don't only have to understand the situation on the ground, you have to learn how to get your message across, how to spread the word, how to explain what is going on, how to promote your own narratives, and how not to let Russians promote their destructive narratives, subversive operations, disinformation, fake news, and everything which we've been witnessing for these 8 years. What President Zelensky is and has always been good in is stratcom, given his background as well. So what he managed to do here, I believe, is to show that he's going to stay here in Ukraine until the very last moment. And as you said, our battle will be infinite. And when he was proposed evacuation, the word and the sentence that he used, I don't need evacuation, I need ammunition. I think it became some kind of a slogan for all of us to understand that we are here fighting shoulder to shoulder for our country. So he did not leave the country. He really has this all the time, his videos and his messages getting across from his bunker. But also, as you mentioned, this communication is on different levels. We have specific Telegram channels. We have a wide network of different communication networks and ways how to get information from the trusted sources, which is absolutely crucial. This is on level of different security blocks. So we get these messages from our military people all the time, from our Minister of Interior, but also from our experts. I mean, me, myself, I'm now in a capacity of as an expert, and I know that like tens and hundreds of my colleagues from different cities of Ukraine, from different regions of Ukraine, just give comments nonstop 24/7 to all international media, trying to explain what is happening in Ukraine. Journalists, reporters, civilians, NGOs, whatever. Everyone is in this process of Stratcom, both internally, domestically in Ukraine, but also globally, internationally. So I believe this is one of the biggest successes of how Ukrainians unite within the country and how they try to promote the truth, not the narratives, but basically the truth of what is going on in Ukraine.
Dr. Gaber, thank you so much once again for just this unbelievable analysis. For everybody joining us, a couple of points that I really want to stress out before we get to our next topic. Ukraine has already won, independently of the facts on the ground, everybody. I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Gaber. And that didn't happen by coincidence, right? And your idea that while the physical invasion of Russia might have only happened for a week, the Russian invasion in the information space, in the hearts and minds, and in the thinking of people has been going on since 2014. So the sharp messaging, the ability for Ukraine to dictate the message as opposed to have to react to the message is something that took a long term. And I really appreciate you pointing that out for everybody, because for the untrained eye or somebody who's just a casual watcher of politics, they might not have realized that this was a long time coming, that Ukraine had this playbook ready to go, and that they themselves have imposed their own information narrative that's been widely accepted. And as you said, there's different levels of communications for different sets of stakeholders, which was really interesting to hear from you. Let's move to sort of the boogeyman right now, shifting to Russia. Vladimir Putin himself, more so than the state of Russia, is under severe internal and external pressure. Before getting on air, Dr. Gaber, we spoke about how at home serious sanctions are biting. There's bank runs, the depreciation of the ruble, people are hoarding physical goods like we're in the Soviet Union, and celebrity descent is materializing across Russia. You know, just a few, you have huge hockey players, huge tennis players, and even the head of the Bolshoi, who normally is an ally of Putin, signing anti-protest papers. You know, you have oligarchs like Deripaska who are also coming out and saying, please stop this war, which is quite interesting. A broad support for Ukraine has never been higher, as we said. But despite, you know, we've already establishing Ukraine having already won the information narrative and then being financially isolated even from China, do you think that there's any return from this right now for President Putin? Or does he have to go all the way in and sort of see this into the end, regardless of what happens to him and, you know, the cratering of his own economy?
Well, I believe there is now a point of no return for Putin, knowing his personality, knowing his state of mind at the moment, and knowing his way of thinking. I would say that there is no chance he will try to use even some kind of face saving and then withdraw his forces, even through negotiations. At the moment, I believe that he is going va-bank, as we say, because he has nothing to lose. And the change of tactics on the ground of Russian forces is actually showing that now it's a completely different Putin, even in his traditional violations of international law, in his traditional violations of humanitarian law. He has gone that far. There is a point of no return at the moment. If you track the development of situation on the ground, that has never been a military operation, as he mentioned, but at least during the first days we had shellings and missiles and bombings of some kind of strategic facilities, including airports, including military bases in Ukraine, and so on. During the last 2-3 days, it's completely mostly on residential areas. It's completely based on the idea that you have to cause as much damage to Ukraine as possible, including also to make our psychological resistance even more difficult, because such things like Mriya aircraft, you know, it is the biggest aircraft and the symbol of President Zelensky dream, because Mriya is dream in Ukraine, and so he was also making this parallel that Ukrainian dream is here. It was burned. Right, the biggest square of Europe in Kharkiv, which is called the Freedom Square, was bombed. then we have hospitals, then we have kindergartens, schools, and so on. So this shows that there is nothing to lose for Putin, and what is happening now is kind of an agony of his regime, I believe. But also going back to what you mentioned about winning information war and narratives, it's important to get this message spread across to Russia and Belarus as well, not only to Ukrainian partners and allies and Ukrainians, but also to the citizens of Russian Federation and of Belarus, who has also joined this unfair war. Because many people, including my relatives, including my close friends living in Russia, did not even know that there is a war happening in Ukraine. They are taught, they are said there is a military operation. So it's important what we're doing now to create specific phone lines, specific Telegram channels for mothers of soldiers who are now fighting in Ukraine to be able to get in touch with their children and to check whether they're here, whether they are alive or not. It's important to tell to people, including with the different ways of cyber warfare, to let people know in Russia and in Belarus what is happening in Ukraine. And the protests, which are now only starting, I believe will get even more and more and more strong in the future as people get access to the true information. This is a complete disillusionment for Russians. This is a so eye-opening experience in Ukraine. I believe it will be a game changer for Russia itself as well.
Dr. Gaber, thank you again for sort of this unbelievable insight on it. And, you know, we're approaching the last 10 minutes of the interview, but a couple of quick points. As you said, that it seems unbelievable for us in the West here in Austria and Slovakia, in Canada, that, you know, nobody knows about the war going on. And it just sort of shows the restriction of the messaging, whether it's with, you know, social media platforms or the state news, who for the first couple of days had only reported images from Donetsk and Luhansk with sunny skies. You know, people, it's not, as you said, just Ukrainians in the West who are trying to get the message up, but other Russians. And, you know, stories come out of Twitter about, you know, restaurants on Google Maps and people writing in the review section of restaurants that, you know, there's a war going on in Ukraine. It just sort of shows the total disregard or sort of the dissatisfaction with this war in general. So, I mean, you couldn't be more right. Dr. Gaber, before we get to the last question, I just wanted to send out a little piece of information for everybody. Dmitry Arpovich, who's a very well-known tweeter about Russian politics and technology, he had a huge thread this morning. And as we go for the second day of negotiations in Gomel coming up, if it's today or tomorrow, he said, referencing back to if Putin can go back, is, and I quote from Dmitry, Putin's minimum bar for a negotiated solution now would likely be Ukraine conceding Crimea to Russia, agreement to never join NATO and EU, and some form of demilitarization, which is obviously from President Zelensky and his staff a completely unacceptable position. So, Dr. Gaber, before we move to the next question, do you have any reactions to this potential minimum bar for a solution, or do you want to just move on to the next question?
Well, yeah, you know, there are so-called notorious red lines, which we've been talking about for all this time for Ukraine. And this is territorial integrity, including Donetsk, Lugansk regions, including Crimea. And this is our right to join whatever alliances we see necessary to join, be it European Union, NATO, or any other alliance, just because this is also about the sovereignty of Ukraine. And all these efforts to so-called demilitarization, denazification of Ukraine is put by Putin. It's something, it's not unacceptable for Ukraine. It basically means that if this happens, Ukraine will cease to exist as a state and as a nation, because in the logics of President Putin, we are all Nazis here, meaning that we want to call ourselves Ukrainians and not Russians. For President Putin, I believe it's important to understand, and it's obvious from his articles, there is no such state as Ukraine. So his best case scenario would be just Ukraine ceasing to exist in different versions. Of course, it will be difficult to maintain control over the territories of the occupied Ukraine, but bringing some pro-Russian government here and change of government, change of Ukrainian politics will be something that he would expect. Of course, this is a non-starter for us. And that is why the first round of negotiations, which happened a couple of days ago and which lasted for like 5-6 hours, basically resulted in nothing but a desire to meet again and to negotiate possible conditions for the ceasefire. So I believe here it's crucial to understand the logics and to understand that these are just at the moment, as far as I can see, impossible. It's not about some kind of concessions from Ukrainian side. We don't have anything to concede. We don't have anything to give concessions on, to give up on, because we never invaded Russia. So it's not two states being in the state of war. It's an occupation of one state by the other. So if we consider our territories on our people, that will mean that there is no such country as Ukraine. So of course, this is not a case for us.
Dr. Gaber, again, thank you for the excellent reaction to it. And for everybody out there, I mean, just so you don't get confused, the US Embassy in Ukraine has put out some great graphics sort of indicating where Kiev was before Moscow. I mean, I think you agree, Dr. Gaber, that the quote going around is Kiev was a vibrant city before Moscow was even a village. So, I mean, to make the fact that, Ukraine is not a state or it's not a real, it's a constructed concept is totally farcical and nobody will accept. And this concept of not accepting things really leads us to our last question here on Global Tremors. Dr. Gaber, during the Cold War, the United States had the Wells Declaration, which never recognized the annexation of the Baltic states and lasted for over 40 years. Dr. Gaber, do you think we're approaching the phase, maybe in 1 month or 2 months, where if President Putin does finally install some sort of puppet regime, that the European Union, Canada, Australia, the United States should never recognize, that as the legitimate ruler of Ukraine or that territory as being part of Russia?
Well, of course, for me, it's difficult to answer this question because apart from being a diplomat and an expert, I'm a Ukrainian myself, so I would never even want to discuss such scenarios. What we're talking about now is that we need more support to defend Ukraine and not to let that puppet regime being installed in Kiev. As I mentioned in the very beginning, this is not a case when once the capital is taken by Russians, it will be there under their control. There might be a kind of a civil war, kind of a guerrilla war, long protracted conflict in different regions to get back control over the capital and so on. So even let's say that we have a government somewhere based in Lviv with Zelensky as his head, and then someone in Kiev, I don't believe this will last long. First, because economically Russia will not be able to maintain control with all sanctions, with all pressure internally, externally. I don't believe this will be a viable scenario for Russia itself. As a very worst case scenario, that might be an option, of course, not to recognize any puppet regime in Kiev as a regime as a government that represents Ukraine. But yet again, I want to mention this. It's absolutely obvious now that when Russia is talking about the protection, about Russian people, about Russia being, as you mentioned, actually being a state before Ukraine appeared, and then Russia itself is bombing Kiev, which always used to be a capital of Kiev Rus, and which always was called a mother of all Russian lands. This shows the complete irrationality of the Russian regime. So I don't believe something like this might actually last for a long time, that such a person like Putin and the regime and everyone who is near him would really get to the point where they can maintain control over Ukraine in a long term, in a long run. And again, as you mentioned, many people, including from the of his closest associates, including from State Duma of the Russian Federation, including from celebrities, opinion leaders, even from the MGIMO University, which is under the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, are now signing petitions that they are against war, they are against this invasion. 1 million people, I believe, signed a petition to stop this war. So it's only a matter of time and support. However much support we get from the West, this means the shorter will be this war and the closer will be our victory as Ukraine and as united democratic world.
Well, for everybody watching on Global Tremors, we're going to be closing out here with Dr. Gaber coming from Ukraine, and you heard it here first from the experts that even if Russia is able to install a puppet regime in Moscow, it won't be for long as it's economically not feasible. And as we've said already, this will not be a hateless occupation. We think of insurgency on the greatest terms. And as you said, Dr. Gaber, as we end off here, there's no option but to resist. So this is an infinite war with no good ending for Russia. So as we end off here, everybody, we're going to be back at 1 p.m. Dr. Gaber, any last closing remarks as we close off our interview?
Stand with Ukraine, and Ukraine will resist. Thank you.
Thank you. So for everybody, Slava Ukraina, we need to keep the focus on it. Material arms, donate, more than a hashtag. So again, Dr. Gaber, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see everybody again, hopefully at 1 p.m. on Global Tremors. Have a nice day.
Thank you.